Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 25th of April of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And the most important, the most interesting updates as usually are coming from Bakhmut. In my previous video I told you that according to few very reliable Russian sources, as a result of clashes, storming operation and fierce fightings, the Russians captured a town by the name of settlement by the name of Khromovo, this one. And at least few sources confirmed that information, that Wagner's entered that village, established control, then according to those sources, the Ukrainians made or were making few counter-offensive operations in this area, trying to regain their lost positions. And later, some Russian sources, some Ukrainian sources and some Russian sources were saying that as a result of counter-offensive operation, the Ukrainians managed to return control at least over part of this settlement Khromovo. The situation there is very complicated, and this situation is completely covered with the fog of war. I believe and I expect that no matter who controls this settlement currently, half or the entire settlement and so on, I believe and I expect that within the next video we're going to see like the entire control, establishing of entire control over this settlement. From the other side, the Russians are pushing from the railroadways in direction of the western fortifications, and as you can see, the gray line currently goes along the ex-military base, and the Russians are saying that they managed to establish control over the territory on the east of the ex-military base. They captured the block with high buildings and they entered at the eastern part of the ex-military base. So we can say that the final part of the battle for western part of Bakhmut has started, because if you remember, we discussed that if the Russians are able to take control over the ex-military base, after that we can start counting not even days but maybe hours before the entire western Bakhmut is going to fall. I have already updated the western sources map, trying to show you the current situation in Bakhmut and the vicinity of Bakhmut. I have marked the territory on Khromovo as a blue cloud, saying that this territory is under Russian control. I assume and I believe that this town is under Russians. I believe that the Russians, currently there are very heavy clashes there, and they just don't want to publish the unconfirmed information, some source, and they expect some video and photo confirmation from this area. Anyway, this settlement or in the gray zone, or there are heavy clashes, and or these territories under Russian control. The Russians developed advance in the eastern part of the western Bakhmut, and currently they're pushing, of course, in the northern part in direction of Khromovo as well, trying to connect the forces, and now they're pushing in direction of the ex-military base, trying to clear this area and to cut the same forces and encircle some forces and so on. And there is a fierce fightings in this area. The Russians are trying to establish final control over this south part of Bakhmut, to take control of these big buildings and the MiG-17 stadium in this area. So that's it about Bakhmut. Soon this town is going to fall anyway. I don't believe the Ukrainians are able to take control, to take back this town, but we'll see. We'll see what is going to be next. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes in Donetsk Frontline in the vicinity of Bakhmut, the Ukrainians lost 360 soldiers, 22 armored vehicles, 3 artillery systems. And very interesting piece of information from that update, Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, is that among 22 armored vehicles, the loss of Ukrainian side during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 7 armored infantry vehicles and 8 armored fighting vehicles. So as you can see, when we try to analyze the structure of the losses among the armored vehicles during the past days, we saw that the major part of the losses were just light vehicles that the Ukrainians were using for evacuation, rotation, getting taking out of their wounded soldiers and so on. But for the previous 24 hours, the number of losses among the armored vehicles significantly increased. From 22 units that Ukrainians lost, 15 units are armored vehicles, like very powerful, like Bradley, like Striker, the same type. And that means that Ukrainians were using the armored vehicles maybe for evacuation from the western part of Bakhmut, but they were discovered, spotted, and destroyed somewhere in the central fields between Ivanovskaya, Bakhmut, and Chasov Yar, somewhere there. The losses are very heavy. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that there was a lot of interesting updates in the vicinity of this town. For example, the Russians published and reported about bombing Bogdanovka. They continue bombing this area because the Ukrainians used this area for sending and moving their forces in direction of the 0506 road to unblock this road for, I don't know for what reason, because this town is blocked safely from the Russian side. But anyway, the Ukrainians are continuing sending their waves by wave. Interesting updates are coming from Konstantinovka. If you remember, yesterday we discussed that as a result of Iskander attack, the 60 soldiers from Georgian Legion was killed and buried under the ruins of the building, and 20 were wounded. And after that, the Ukrainian military authorities took a decision to replace the foreign Georgian Legion, the rest of the soldiers, to another position. And they asked, for these purposes, they asked the Ukrainian forces who were located in new position to give this position to the Georgian Legion, and there was some kind of small fightings between these two brigades, these two forces. There are no numbers or any results of that, but anyway, this is a very interesting accident that took place on this front line. Very interesting updates are coming from Slaviansk, Seversk, Bilogorovka, and Liman front line from this area. If you ask me, I would tell that currently this is the most important front line, even more important than Bakhmut. And this is not like my own opinion. I made this conclusion based on facts. And for example, the Russians are saying that during the previous 24 hours, they attacked using the missiles, artillery forces, and air force, and so on. They destroyed the positions of 54th Mechanized Brigade in Slaviansk. And this is the forces. This is like some kind of reserves. If we take a look at the Russian deployment map, we're going to see that the main position that are keeping this 54th Brigade is located on the south of Bilogorovka. So this is the 51st Brigade, and this is their position in Verkhnyokamyanska and on the south of Bilogorovka. And the main job of these forces is to hold the Russians and not allow them to attack in direction of Grigorievka, let's say, and to encircle the forces in Bilogorovka. So this is their main position. And if you're able to follow my table that I'm currently making with based on the Ministry of Defense report, you're gonna see that during the previous 3 days, the Russians noted this brigade for 3 times since the Sunday of the previous week. The Russians are saying that they attacked these positions of these forces in Verkhnyokamyanska, they attacked these forces in Serebryanka, and Grigorievka, and Slaviansk. And we see now that they're currently focused on this brigade, trying to force them to step back. And the thing is that the fact that they destroyed the reserves in Slaviansk are saying me that soon these forces are going to make some kind of rotation, and possibly this is the next candidate for making another video where the forces of this 54th Brigade is going to claim their commanders, that they have no support, no rotation, and possibly this is the next point where the Russians are planning to make penetration in direction of Seversk and to encircle the Ukrainians in Bilogorovka. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that during the previous 24 hours they attacked a position of 81st Air Mobile Brigade. And if we take a look at this map, we see that this 81st Air Mobile Brigade is located almost in the same place with 54th. So we see that the Russians are heavily concentrated in this area. This is a focal point and even more important than Bakhmut, because timings are coming and soon Bakhmut is going to fall, and right after Bakhmut the Russians need to make a fast operation in direction of Seversk, and for these purposes they need to clear this back in the vicinity of Bilogorovka. Also, the Russians are saying that they attacked 58th Brigade in the Yampol, in the vicinity of Yampol, in this area. And this is our 58th Brigade. And the Russians are saying that they attacked 25th Brigade. So this brigade is located also in the same area. So currently this is the most focused, the most hunted, the most concentrated area where the Russians are trying to use all the types of weapon they have, including new weapon. Furthermore, as you know, this is the most, let's say, when talking about the types of weapon, the Russians, the real Russian army is located here in this area, and they have the most modern weapon the Russians have. The T-14 tanks, Armata, T-90, rockets, guided bombs, and so on. and they're trying to reduce the Ukrainian forces in this area as much as possible. For example, even if we take a look at 58th Brigade, according to the table I'm trying to make, you see that during the previous 3 days, this brigade was attacked at least 2 times. One time in the Yampol and another time in Serebryanka. And the same situation about, let's say, it was 81st Brigade. Let's take a look at this. As you can see, the forces of 81st Brigade was hit in Grigorievka and Belogorovka today, and for example 4 days ago in the vicinity of Yampolovka. So currently this is the most concentrated area, and this most important area according to the report of Ministry of Defense, according to the facts. Of course, when talking about the number of losses, the losses are not so heavy in this area in comparison with other front lines. The Russians are saying that as a result of fierce fightings, clashes, artillery duels, bombings on the area between Kupiansk and Liman, the Ukrainians lost 145 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system. And we understand this because there is like a forest very big where the Ukrainians are able to hide their positions, their tanks, artillery systems, and so on. So that's why the Russians need to be over concentrated in this area and to be very, very careful and to have a very nice intelligence in this area to understand where exactly the Ukrainians are hiding their position. When talking about Kupiansk front line, the Russians are saying that as a result of clashes, they destroyed another warehouse of 67th Mechanized Brigade in the vicinity of Kharkov. And this is the second day in a row. First time they were talking about the area in the vicinity of Chuguyev. There was one warehouse, and currently they destroyed another warehouse almost on the border with the Russian Federation, in the town by the name of Ternova. Let's go back to the Russian sources map. This map shows this is one, so almost on the border. And this is very interesting why the Russians are concentrated on the 67th Brigade possibly. And as we discussed, the Ukrainians have some plans to cross the Russian border and to make some fake attack in direction of Belgorod to ruin the Russians' defense orders and to disorganize their military authorities and military forces in this area and to break the Russians' plans. Anyway, according to information, according to the report of Ministry of Defense, I see that the Russians intensifying their actions on the Kupiansk and Liman front line, and I expect that they're going to activate their offensive operation in this area, because anyway, if the Russians want to take Seversk, they need to capture Belogorovka, they need to clear Serebryanka forest, and they need to get Zhiribets river, and after that they need to start Yampol-Liman offensive operation. And believe me, we're going to see this. At least the facts are saying something like this. Now we are going to Donetsk, the capital of DPR itself. There are also a lot of updates. And as we know, the most hunted brigade in this area is 110th Mechanized Brigade. If we take a look at the Russian deployment map, the main position of that 110th Defense Brigade are located in Bakhmut itself. This is like position of 110th Brigade on the north of Avdiivka, Another positions is in the vicinity of Kamenka, 110th Brigade. The next position is located on the in the vicinity of New York-Toretsk agglomeration. So this is the most mobile, flexible, most powerful brigade in this area. So this is the main brigade in this area, and the rest of brigades, we can say, have their own duties, and 110th Brigade is the, let's say, the base of the defense line, defense structure and configuration on Avdiivka front line. And the Russians are saying that as a result of clashes, they managed to develop and advance in direction of Novokalinova, and also this is the area of responsibility of 110th Brigade. Currently, there are a lot of differences between different maps, but the Western sources map shows the progress of the Russians in this area. They started showing the progress of the Russians in this area a very long time ago. And currently we can say that the picture that the Western sources map shows us is the picture that is currently we can find in this area. So the Russians are pushing in direction of Novokalinova, and we understand that the main goal of the Russian, the main target, is to take control over Achertina. This is a small territory, small logistic hub. There is a railroad from the south, and as we discussed many times, if the Russians are able to establish control over these like settlements like Keramik, Arkhangelsk and Achertina, and it is much more easier to establish control over these towns than to take control over Avdiivka, then this entire area on the south will be collapsed automatically. And this is the Russians' movements, and they're, at least the facts are saying, and the fact is that the Russians are attacking this area. We have a lot of signs in this area for the last, let's say, 3 days. The Russians were attacking like positions in Keramik, in Novokalinovo itself, and so on. The facts of the icons, events, and the reports from the Ministry of Defense these facts are saying that the Russians are concentrated in this area and are continue pushing, not to encircle Avdiivka, let's say in direction of Berdych Petrovskaya, but to attack Achertina. From the other side, the other Russian forces from Pesky front line are pushing in direction of Severna, and currently they published another video of establishing control of another trenches and on the way to the Severna. They're moving very slowly. It's a very difficult job, of course, but they're moving and they're taking more and more positions. And of course, the main goal in this area is first to take control over Toninka and Severna. I don't think that the Russians are going to advance further to Orlovka. I believe that that if they're able to take control of these two settlements will be enough to establish at least operational encirclement of Avdiivka. But we need to understand that operational encirclement of Avdiivka and this situation means nothing, because believe me, during the previous months, since 2014, the Ukrainians were able to get there and to move there a lot of reserves, a lot of ammo depots underground and so on. And the siege of Avdiivka will take months before this town is going to fall. But anyway, this process should be started anyway and someday, and for the Russians it's better to start as early as possible, because another 3 months they will need to count before Avdiivka collapse. As we discussed, the Russians continue advancing between Krasnogorovka and Nivolska. By this operation, the Russians are trying to solve a lot of issues, to split the defense line in this area and to force the Ukrainians to move their artillery from Nivolska in direction of this, let's say, Gornyak, Korachovka agglomeration to this area. The Russians are pushing in direction of Marinka. There are still like some kind of resistance from the Ukrainian side, and they're keeping their territory under their control, at least the western part, but the Russians advancing very slowly, but they do this. Very interesting updates are coming from South Donetsk and Zaporozhye area. The Russians are saying that as a result of bombing, artillery duels, and clashes with commandos and so on, the Ukrainians lost 145 soldiers, 11 armored vehicles, and 3 artillery systems. As you can see, the level of losses from the Ukrainian side are growing every single day, very slowly, but the level is growing. And that means that the Russians intensifying their activity in this area, their attacks and so on. And now we see a very interesting configuration on the front lines. Very interesting configuration. Let's go back to the Western sources map. We see that according to the number and facts that we can find based on the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation report, we see some intensifying of the Russian actions on the Kupiansk-Liman front line. I'm making these arrows trying to show you they're not representing the real picture that the Russians are moving in direction of Borova. I'm trying to show you, like by these arrows, that the level of losses has been increased, at least on the Kupiansk front line, in comparison with the previous days or something like this, weeks, months at all. And the same situation we can see on the South Donetsk and Zaporozhye area. So the Russians increase and intensify their actions. There are many reasons why did the Russians do this. First of all, the Ukrainians from their side are bringing more and more forces to this area before the greatest counteroffensive operation. For example, some Russian sources are saying that Ukrainians managed to accumulate up to 12,000 soldiers in Gulay-Polye. So this is already attack phase. It's around 2.5 brigades that they can use to attack Pologi just from Gulay-Polye. We know that the entire number of brigades that Ukrainians are going to use for the counter-offensive operation is 15 completely newly created, mechanized, mainly mechanized and airborne brigades with Western weapon, more than 1,200 units of just armored vehicles, Western production, around 200 tanks with the uranium polluted shells and so on. It's a very powerful feast. But now we're talking about the Russians. We see, furthermore, a few days ago, the Western sources published a very interesting article. The article was that there is a piece of information, there is some chances that when the weather becomes better, no matter the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation in the south that they're going to launch anyway, there is a very high chances that the Russians will launch their own offensive operation. And according to based on the facts that we receive from the Frontline, from the Ministry of Defense, from the some independent military experts and so on, we see some kind of intensification of the actions in South Donetsk and Zaporozhye area and on the Kupiansk front line. Currently, if you take a look at this area, you might think that the Russians are going to encircle this area. No, it's not just operation about encirclement. I see that currently the Russians are trying to stretch the Ukrainian forces between Kharkiv area and Zaporozhye area. And the main logistic line between these two areas is this small blue cloud between Pavlovka, Lazova, Orlovka. So this is the main logistic hub that Ukrainians need to use for regrouping between these two front lines, Kupiansk and, let's say, South Donetsk. And if the Russians attack on the Kupiansk, the Ukrainians, if they want to redeploy their forces, they need to use this logistic block for regrouping and resending their forces to Kharkiv or to this area. And it's a perfect situation for the Russians. They don't need to think a lot, they need to try to find the Ukrainian position, they just need to establish some focus and some 24 hours control over this square, and then they will know everything about the Ukrainians, about their forces, about the level of regrouping, which forces they are sending where, and so on. And I believe they're doing this right now. But I see that the Russians are stretching the Ukrainian forces by these attacks from completely two opposite front lines, from the northern one, the most northern one, and the most southern one. I'm not talking about Kherson area. I'm talking about the front lines that have the common combat line between Ukrainians and the Russians. Very interesting. And I do expect that the Russians are going to launch this offensive operation at the same time when the Ukrainians launch their offensive operation in Zaporozhye to encircle Seversk and to get to Kramatorsk-Slaviansk agglomeration. And they're planning to do something. And I see this. At least I have like maybe fifth or third feeling that tells me that the Russians are going to do this. Let's discuss in more detail the Zaporozhye area. The Russians are saying that they destroyed a few warehouses in this area. They destroyed a lot of drones in this area, positions of the Ukrainians. When talking about Ugledar, the Russians continue erasing process of Ugledar. I believe we can start counting weeks before the entire Ugledar is going to be erased, and after that the Russians will be open the gates in direction of Kurakhova, this area. And I believe that the erasing of Ugledar will be synchronized with the erasing of Marinka from the north and from the south, and as soon as the Russians are able to erase the western part of Marinka and the Ugledar itself, they will start like pushing in this area as well. Or at least the Ukrainians are going to get more forces there, and the Russians will just get another wall, another barrier, and they will start the process from the beginning. But to tell the truth, there are no big town settlements like Ugledar and Marinka after Ugledar and Marinka, and the next big town is Kurakhova and Velika Novosovka. All these towns is just small villages, and I don't think that the Russians are going to have a lot of problems by passing these villages and settlements. When talking about Kherson, the Russians published another video of destroyed Su-25 in this area. After the independent military experts start publishing video and information about the fact that the Ukrainians very slowly, step by step, but they increase their expanse along these islands in the Dnipro River, and the Russians start bombing this area heavily without even counting guided bombs, missiles, nothing. They just took a decision to erase these islands in the Dnipro River as well. Furthermore, they sent some soldiers from the Russian side to this bridge, to this part of Kherson area, and they made the video that this bridge and this road is under Russian control, and the updates that we saw on the Institute of Study of War map, and they were saying that it was a fake updates. Anyway, we're gonna follow this situation. I believe that we are going to see the intensifying of Ukrainian actions in this area as well, and they will try to get to the small town Alyoshki if it's possible. For many reasons, they need to do this to stretch the Russian army, to change their focus, and just to create another point of pressure. And they will push, and maybe they're able to achieve something. Who knows? We'll see. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.